welcome everybody to the Pushing the Conversation Forward webinar. I want to talk about, well, 2020 is heavy, period. We know that, right? I do want to kind of reflect back to what we did in the summertime when it comes to issues of race and diversity. I want to talk about what's going on now, currently. And then from there, I want to talk about, I'm hoping that I can eventually get on with one-to-one calls or one-to-one meetings with you all, because I really want to hear your voice of what it looks like in the push, what you would like to be created, how you would like to move forward together. And I know these webinars don't always give space for everybody's voice to be heard, but I would love to set up those one-to-one meetings or those one-to-one times where we can have those conversations. So as you see in the chat section, if you have any questions, be sure to put it in the chat. I put my email in the chat. Go ahead and write that down or copy it now and then email me, because I do want to have those discussions with you going forward. So as you know, in the summertime, we had the Can You Hear Us webinar. And in that space, it was room for 5 Black therapists to get on and share their stories, either personally or professionally, of dealing with racism. And it was heavy. And it was stories that I heard before. And since then, I've heard the stories again. And each time I hear them, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's a heavy story. And then from there, we Practice at the Practice did Black Leaders Mattered, and they got on the podcast and they talked again about their expertise and their areas. And it was great. But again, 2020 being heavy, we continually see division, issues of race. We see where people aren't included. Okay. In the summertime, we heard a lot of companies, a lot of businesses put out their statements, right? And some statements were genuine. Ben and Jerry's was like thorough and like a gut punch. And I think that was probably the best one. And then there were some that just seemed like empty words because it was almost too little too late. Like, did you really mean it? And if we're talking about now, today in October, pushing forward, I'm wondering where everybody is at. And so why I wanted to jump on is I didn't want to leave the summer where it was at and say, okay, we did that, we're done. But I also want to talk about what we can do right now. If we look at 2020 and the deaths that we've seen, Ahmaud Arbery, we heard about that in the spring. That was months after it happened, where it became a national issue. George Floyd, unfortunately, that long video, some people watched it, some people said they still can't watch it. But that was the one that got the most conversation going. We know about Breonna Taylor. Okay. Jacob Blake shot in the back 7-8 times by cops in Wisconsin. And the thing about it is that these are the ones we hear, but there's so many that we don't hear about. Earlier this week, there was a man that was shot in Philadelphia, in West Philadelphia, with his mother screaming, "Don't shoot my son." And he was murdered as well. And so the thing about it is, especially for Black people, what you'll hear consistently is like, this isn't anything new, it's just being filmed right now. Right? But then now there's so many names that we don't hear about that don't make national headlines. But what I want to talk about is, how can we push together? How can we understand each other to know that, okay, some people have questions and they come in wanting to know, and then understand that, okay, as Black therapists, this is so heavy on us that even though we have these conversations and hear these names, man, we still got to show up the next day and hold space for our clients. And we're feeling this weight and this heaviness ourselves. What does that look like in the push forward? And the reason why I created this, like where it was like, man, okay, Joe, I asked him, okay, I need to jump back on, I need to do more, because we can look at Breonna Taylor and we can say, okay, the city awarded her family, what, 12 million. But at the same time, they got 12 million, nobody's found guilty. And I remember that day going through social media and seeing Black therapists say, you know what, I had to cancel my day. I had to cancel my appointments for the next day because what I was feeling was too heavy to go on. And I said, no, now let's come together again and let's have a conversation. Okay, what have we done individually? What can we do collectively? Some people protest. I was out there in some of the protests here in Fort Worth, but some people don't protest, and that's okay if protesting is not what you do. Some people were intentional about donating, which is great. Like, we should continue to donate. We can create little things in whatever area we're in. I got together with some of my undergraduate college friends and say, okay, listen, let's create a scholarship for those Black students that got on campus now so we can help them out. Let's put our money in Black-owned banks. Let's be intentional about giving our money to Black businesses. Okay, we can do those things, but now today what I want to talk about is what we can do collectively as we still do those things individually. What can we do in our professions that we learn together that we can be intentional about taking back out into our communities? At the same time, what can we learn from each other if we created intentional community? What would it look like if we were intentional about working together and creating diverse community? Maybe a mastermind group where we came around and we were intentional about being diverse, where we came with our big ideas, where we came with what we wanted to see for our practices. And we got those resources from other consultants, right? Whether it be marketing or how to manage our money or how to go a group practice. But within that, we brought either social justice big ideas, we brought big ideas for our practices, and we charged each other up. We challenged each other. Now take it back to where you're at and now go do the work, right? Where we come in and we ask certain questions, and it's okay to ask those questions and not be fearful of doing so. I have a therapist here at the group practice, and also too, let me add this because I want to say some things about the people I've been talking to recently. I'm doing a podcast takeover on the Practice of the Practice podcast, and I'm going to have 10 people on. I've already recorded some interviews, but I've been having some great conversations with therapists along the way. And one of the therapists I've been talking about is here at my practice, and she has, pretty long dreads. And she was saying, you know what, I was with one of my colleagues who's not Black, and just went in and touched her hair. And she had to explain to that person, please don't touch my hair. That's not what I like. And had to break it down for her. And she said, you know what, I helped that person understand where I could have embarrassed them and I could have went off. But what I did was we had a conversation and she understood. My thing is, what would it be like if we had intentional community that not only are we talking about practice and building, but we're intentional about having those conversations about, listen, let me tell you why it's important, why you just don't come in and touch my hair. I'm not for show that way. Or on the flip side, I heard another therapist say, I saw, it was a therapist who wasn't Black, and she said, I saw my colleague and her hair was changed, and I wanted to say something so bad, but I didn't know what to say. So I just sat back. Right? So making sure that we understand those conversations and what it looks like in that space, asking those conversations, what would it be like next time we had a conference and we said, okay, intentionally, all these Black therapists with all these great niches, all these great ideas, let's make sure we get at least half of those presenters to be Black therapists, and we'll come in and we'll talk. Because it's just not the same people who have the expertise in certain areas. There's other voices that know these things. Right? Or the conferences we go to and we say, you know what, if you're going to get a vendor, make sure you use certain Black-owned catering companies or Black-owned businesses to do these things. So it's important that we understand, and if we're talking about the push individually, collectively, and within our profession, let's talk about how to get there together. And I'm realizing that there's some things that must be included so that we can push forward. First and foremost is the idea of diversity. Okay, it's the idea of having people in the room that don't look and sound like you. If you're, and we hear that being told many times, if you're the smartest person in your circle, right, you need a new circle because you need people to challenge you and push you forward. At the same time, sometimes it's good to get amongst circles and people that don't always look like you, but that way you can hear different ideas, and don't always think like you. That way you can be challenged to do greater and go forward. I had a conversation last week, and I teased her, one of my closest friends, who's also a mental health professional. And she was just asking me a bunch of questions about an idea I had. I remember getting so frustrated, like, stop asking me these questions. But what she was doing was challenging me to think deeper. And I needed that in that moment to go forward. So the idea of diversity, being intentional about being in community where not everybody does look like us, but we have the same common goal. Then it's the understanding that diversity is is different than inclusion. Okay, it can be diverse, but are we including all the voices? Even if we do sit at the same table, am I including a voice of the person that doesn't look like me and doesn't have the same thoughts as me? That's an intentional act to be inclusive and to want everybody to chime in at the table and to hear everybody's voice, to realize that your voice is important. I want to hear your story. Let's see what this looks like from here. And then the understanding too of being anti-racist is an action word. The same way we say, okay, love is an action verb. Okay, you got to put love in action. You just can't talk it. It's the same thing with being anti-racist. We know now it's not enough just to say, okay, I'm not racist. That's not me. Okay, but what are you doing to show it? What are you actively doing? Again, you may not be the person that says I'm going to be on the front lines of the protest, Monday through Friday. Maybe that's not you. but what are you doing actively to work against and combat racism, again, in your profession and then also in your community? So in order to do this, right, in order to have these intentional communities, in order to have this space right here, there's a couple of things that we have to understand in the space that we want to be in. For people who aren't of color, don't be afraid to get uncomfortable, right? And some of the podcasts that I did recently, I just had that conversation, and I don't know if they're on here with Julianne and Andrea. They're in Portland, right? But they made that statement themselves. You can't be afraid to get uncomfortable. We say it all the time to our clients, right? No growth happens in a comfort zone. We've seen every meme that says that. We said it, we believe it. We know we have to get uncomfortable ourselves to grow. But it also comes to the fact that in order to engage in this conversation, you're going to have to get uncomfortable. It's going to make you squirm a little bit. It's going to make you cringe a little bit, and you're going to want to back up. And with the support of others, we're going to continue to push you forward. Okay, especially for those people who, again, maybe Black people too. It's going to be hard. You got to get uncomfortable. You got to be willing to have these conversations. There's an article, and I guess it is a small plug because my brother wrote the article. He wrote it for Newsweek. He's an English professor, but he was talking about, it's called "Why I Still Talk to White People About Racism." And in the article, he makes this quote. He said, "Should white people do their own work?" He said, "Yes, the same way students need to continue their studies after a lecture." So when you get this information, don't just take the lecture, I learned, I'm good. No, you got to continue to go do your work and be active in it. Then he continues and says, "And yes, Black people, we are the lecturers. We all have doctorates in experiencing racism, and our expertise is needed right now." So a lot of times too, yes, Black people get exhausted with having these conversations, exhausted when we keep seeing these murders, to the point where it's traumatizing, where you just got to scroll through it on Facebook. I don't want to watch another video. Please don't post the video. I need to lean on somebody. I need to take time off from work. But at the same time, your voice is needed if we're going to bring about change. Okay, so again, how do we move forward together? And we all know Dr. Kling made that quote, right? Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We have to understand that if it's hurting me, in turn, it's hurting you. But unfortunately, where our country is right now, there's such a divide where it's this side or that side. And we've come to almost, and not, well, yeah, embrace it and then stand on either side. But we have to learn how to work together. And if we be honest again, on November the 3rd, we're going to be in a different space as well. Whichever way it goes, there's going to be some words spit at the other side. There's going to be some action taken. I've already heard some therapists say, I've already blocked my schedule off for next Wednesday because emotionally, I'm not going to be able to handle it. That's serious. That's traumatic. And to be able to understand how this affects us all.